Welcome to Buddha's in Your Landfill, or Buddhism just plain and simple. So, we have been talking about the center as we're talking about worldviews. And I'm going to try and go back to the beginning because, as you know, my every talk kind of stands alone, but I want to. It's hard to have a class when it's kind of like having a class in a park in the city, and every day I come to class and different people are there. So how to make it consistent. So today I just want to go back to the beginning of why we're in such a fix. I'm rereading my favorite writer, Albert Lowe. He's written a number of books, but he's a modern Zen master. He's dead now, but he ran a Zen center in Canada. Written a number of books, Albert Lowe, and he talks about a worldview for the 20th century, but he talks about it from a Buddhist point of view. Zen, particularly Rinzai Zen. Rinzai Zen is the Zen of Zen koans. But anyway, I digress. So what I want to do is go back to the Middle Ages, 400 years ago, in the beginning of the modern world, which is where the world we live in now, the fishbowl we live in now, began. With the just like when the Soviet Union crumbled, the Middle Ages crumbled. Now, the Middle Ages was dominated by the Holy Roman Catholic Church. This was like a mythological dome that united Europe, all the different tribes and nations of Europe. You understand, before Europe became nations, it was a bunch of tribal people, each with a fundamental pagan religion that grew out of the hunting, the Neolithic hunting age, and this pagan mythology was superimposed by the Catholic mythology or dome, which came out of the Middle East. So we have a Middle Eastern mythology coming out of the ancient civilizations of the Middle East, imposed over a hunting Neolithic or Paleolithic or what Neolithic mythology of the hunt. Two entirely different mythologies, or religions, if you say. But anyway, so the Middle Ages integrated all of these European tribes under Rome, and the reference then became the church as an instrument of salvation. And salvation from what? Well, the universe in the view of the Middle Ages was a 3-layer cake. Hell, heaven, and earth. So the whole purpose of life in the Middle Ages was to go here and not down here. So life was very precarious. Life was like walking on thin ice. At any moment you could fall into the pits of eternal damnation. This was a horrifying feeling that with any moral mistake, any lapse of morality or attention to the goal, you would drop through this, a hole would open up, and you would drop into eternal fire. And the description of the eternal fire was very vivid. So actually, everybody wanted to get to heaven, and so the way to heaven, of course, was through the church. And at the peak of the Middle Ages, as you recall, these great Gothic cathedrals were built, and every city had to have a big one. And these took all their treasure. It was like having a moonshot. It was like it was like building the pyramids. All of the culture's treasure went into creating a Gothic cathedral in every city, because these Gothic cathedrals were like entranceways into salvation. And even the door of the Gothic cathedral, you see, was always like, it was shaped like that, you see. So you entered there, and here you would have the cherubims, or you would have the gargoyles guarding the entrance to heaven. You see, you had to go through the church, which was, the doorway was a feminine symbol. The mother church, you went through the mother, and the goal of the whole society was salvation. Well, this dome crumbled because the science of the day under this dome was alchemy. Alchemy. Now we look on it now as kind of like we don't really understand what it was about, but it was a science in which experiments on nature were conducted, but the subjective mythological view or poetic view of the scientist and the experiment were mixed up, so that you could not repeat the experiment. It was like a recipe that only the cook knew, because it was mixed up with magic. So it was kind of like a mixture of magic and facts. And so the subject and the objective view was mixed up and could not be separated. So there was no scientific laws, there was no verification, there was no certainty. The only certainty, you see, was the church. The only certainty was the interpretation of reality according to the church, which relied on the Bible. You see. So there was no problem with certainty, because everything was interpreted through the lens of the church and the dogma and the doctrine and the scholastic interpretation of the Bible, which was all framed within this three-layer cake of heaven, earth, and hell, you see. So Copernicus and Galileo came along, and they looked up there and say, whoa, the earth is not the center of the world. You see, the earth is not the center of the world. The earth is just another planet out here. So the sun is the center of our galaxy, and then you have other galaxies. So that took away the center. That broke. That's why the church got so pissed. Galileo, Copernicus, all of these early scientists, Bruno got burned at the stake, excommunicated, which meant that you were going to hell. So the center was lost, you see. So what replaced this world that crumbled at the end of the Middle Ages with the factual finding of, look through this and see for yourself? You see, look and see for yourself. You'll see that the facts tell a different story. And then, of course, to pile more disruption on this, Darwin came along and took man out of the center. You see, before Darwin, man was the center of all the species. But Darwin comes along and says, oh, man is just another species. We're all evolving, you see. So that was the death blow to the worldview in which the earth and man were the stable center around which everything revolved. There was no doubt. But now doubt was entered, you see, doubt. Doubt was introduced into the Holy Roman Church and the mythology and the worldview that held it together. So what replaced it? The objective view of reality, which was really formulated by Sir Francis Bacon and Descartes. Now, what they and I remember when I went to Old Dominion, I majored in English, and I would read Francis Bacon and more or less his literature, English literature. I had no idea what it was really about. And when I studied philosophy, of course, you read Descartes, who said, I think, therefore I am. Now, what was that about? Was the fact that when the dome of the Holy Roman, not Empire, but Catholic Church, which kind of like replaced the Holy Roman Empire, when the dome, this mythological dome, collapsed, you see, everything was possible. Because, so the quest now became, instead of salvation, the quest was for certainty. Certainty became of ultimate concern. Why? Because when this system collapsed, which created certainty, there was no, if you doubted this system, you were going to hell. Period. So there was no doubt here in this system. But when doubt entered, the dome cracked. So now, what could you be certain of? Now that heaven, earth, and hell were no longer stable, the three-layer cake fell off the table. What could you be certain of now? So Descartes searched for certainty. He was plagued with doubt like a Zen monk. You see, where is truth? What can I be certain of? What can I say without doubt that is true? And he kind of whittled it all down until he got to the ground, and he said, I think, therefore I exist. So he based his whole edifice, the structure of the modern world that we live in today, the framework, the mythological framework of the modern world, the way we see it, our common sense world, the way we know we're not crazy, the common way we all see the same thing, this external world of things, and we're in time and space. We're things in time. What kind of things are we? We're thinking things. So Descartes created the ground on thought and built the modern structure from that. And the two structures of the modern world, I'm running out of room here. I'll erase my Buddha's Made Simple, was that science and the scientific method. Sir Francis Bacon described and formulated the scientific method, which basically is that truth is determined by our senses, and truth are ideas or recipes or formulas or theories that must be repeated and verified by other scientists. How we just take that for granted. But truth comes in through the senses. The senses, you see. So it's concrete. It's experiential. And then the laws that hold all this data together must be repeatable. And if it can be repeated, then we say this is true. Until a new law comes along which kicks the can down the road. But the point is, this is a material world. And that's what we call the objective world. So science, the domain of science, you see, is the material world. And so, where does religion come in? Well, this is objective. And now what about the subjective? Well, the subjective world would be personal. See, this is third person, it. The subjective view is personal. I am. What's my values? I, as a feeling being, you see. That's subjective. My perception, my belief, my opinion, my. You see, this is my. This is it. So this is first person. My as the center, or it, stuff, you see. So this is the domain of religion. So everything was fine. Religion gets the subjective, science gets the objective. But there was a problem. The scientific view became so successful, created the industrial age, medicine, inventions. The material world began to be controlled. Nature began to be controlled. So if you wanted to fix something, you didn't go ask God to fix it. You ask a scientist to fix it. And it works. The future is controlled by science, not by petitions to God. So the religious view, the religious domain, kind of got left out in the cold and bypassed. So this objective view then is the modern world we live in, and it's 400 years old, and it's now an old man. It's reached its peak. I would say the peak, the climax of it, because you see the objective reality offers salvation too through science. And it's called utopia. Scientific utopia. And if you ever read up about, of course I grew up in the 50s, I was an adult in the 50s, but if you go back and look at the scientific, or the Jetsons, you look at the Jetsons. The 50s believed was the last decade in which scientific utopia was still salvation. In other words, science could know everything and solve every problem, and by now, according to the 50s, we would all be living like the Jetsons. Now was the future from the 50s, and now we should all be pushing buttons and riding around in little jet planes and just sitting back and letting robots do everything, and we would be in heaven. So it was through science we were going to get to heaven, not through the church, and not through God, you see. But then the 60s came, and it all came tumbling down. And now global warming, and now the proliferation of weapons, and now the proliferation of intelligent bugs because they have become immune to our magical pesticides. And so science, we've discovered, doesn't end all problems. It just creates a new generation of problems. And the problems get more, not less, you see. So something's wrong. Something's missing. a great doubt comes in again. See? The doubt. Something is missing. We're out of track. We're off course. We have lost something. I doubt. So the certainty of science that lasted for 400 years is now in the same place that the Holy Roman Catholic Church was at the end of the Middle Ages. Doubt. Doubt. Okay, we'll end there and pick this up in the next talk. Thanks for dropping in.